Okay. Um, so, so I know, I know, Benji, you said we don't need to hear about your childhood, but it is worth noting that I launched Industrious with my childhood next door neighbor. Like truly, my, basically our windows looked right into their windows. We since we were 2 years old, we grew up next door to each other. And at the time we launched the business, he was working in real estate, and I was actually running an education organization that ran essentially, or still runs, hybrid, half online, half offline universities in East Africa. And our largest funder was IKEA, the furniture company, the Kia Foundation. And I had a meeting with their president. Our U.S. offices, the bulk of the staff was in East Africa, so the U.S. offices were quite small. So we were in a shared workplace, and I went to prepare for the meeting, and the light bulbs are out, and the conference room table is sticky, and it just didn't work. It was like um, it wasn't professional enough. So I actually moved the meeting to a Le Pen Quotidien, this like coffee shop nearby. And I think that evening I was just stewing. I was, livid because it was the most important meeting of my life. I was paying for office space, and it didn't meet the sort of standard of, and I think pretty reasonable standard of professionalism or elegance where I could hold the meeting there. So I was using a coffee shop despite the fact that I was paying for an office. And I think for me, it very much felt like there are advantages to, shared office, and beyond below a certain team size, it's just so clear that's the right option. And if I want to take advantage of that, but would need something more professional that was a better fit for our organization, there must be 50,000 companies that feel similarly. And Justin, my next door neighbor from growing up, and best friend, had similar experiences with his shared workplace that he was using. And so we said, you know what, this is just that classic entrepreneurial, I'd be customer number one for this product. So we launched it. And it was a total side project. We both had full-time jobs. And even for the first 7 cities we did, we were trying to also have our day jobs. And eventually it was growing so quickly, we had to move over to running Industrious full time. And that was 6 years ago at this point. Are we back on audio wise? Okay. Well,
We're working. I have no idea now what the issue is. I do know. Benji, are you unmuted? Let's see. I'm getting a message.
well, I will keep going then.
We can keep going. I look like her. We can fill in.
Okay.
Well, it's really cool that you started at Le Pen. That's at least a place you can get good food there. I'm curious, like I know you guys were just listed obviously on Inc. 500's fastest growing company. Like, when did this like exponential growth happen? I know you said you have over 100 companies. Like, how did that? I guess on the timeline, when did that happen?
So we've been growing. So let's say revenue growth. We've been growing for over 100% a year for a long time now. So I think this would be our 6th year of over 100% compounded revenue growth. So very early on. I mean, since probably year 1 of the business. Now, it's hard for a business to grow at over 100% a year in perpetuity. Like for me now, we're the size business where I think we could continue to, but my sense is the growth of the business will stabilize more at something like 50 to 60% a year revenue growth, which is still puts a lot of pressure on a business. But for reasons we can get into, it is an industry where there's just a lot of growing demand right now. I think I'm biased, but I think we're the best at what we do. And so it's hard to get off that hyper growth kind of treadmill in a certain way, because in certain ways the market is demanding it. And so and I think, our business model is we don't sign leases with landlords. We do management agreements where the landlord puts up the majority of the capital and really we get a fee in exchange for running it. So it's a pretty risk mitigated business. So the other thing is you look at a lot of hyper growth businesses right now, and the premise is like, we're going to hemorrhage money and one day we're going to figure out how to make money. And I certainly think the market is thankfully eventually, turning against that particular way of running a business, but that's not really the Industrious MO. So I don't know. I suspect we're going to keep up that very high growth rate for a while to come.
Yeah.
COVID notwithstanding.
Yeah, and I'm not going to get into the COVID stuff. I'll let Benji do that. She's coming back. But one more question I'm really curious about, someone like entering the workforce newly, what is your target demographic when it comes to your workspaces? Is it everyone, or like who, what age group, I guess, in demos are using flex workspaces these days?
So, to zoom our position, this is an outsourcing industry. You're going to companies and you're saying this thing that for the last 50 years you did yourself, the delivery of your employees' workplace experience, is something you should be buying as a product from us. And that particular value prop, I wouldn't say is concentrated in any particular company type, vintage, et cetera. So we have an enormous number of large enterprise businesses. We have, a lot of mid-sized PR firms, and we do have some solo entrepreneurs. We're the premium provider in our market, and that extends to pricing. And so we're probably weak compared to our competitors at serving the very early stage startup market. I would love to. This is not about wanting to run away from that segment. Like, I'm an entrepreneur. I wish that we are able to serve more. Like, we started the business 3 weeks ago and we're going to take over the world. But it probably would be imprudent if that was your company to go, use the sort of premium workplace as a service provider. And so as a result, I will say, the average age of an Industrious customer is, I think, 37 or 38. The average vintage of an Industrious kind of company is 13 years, and the average size skews large relative to the rest of the industry. Mm-hmm. And that's that. We're not a luxury product. It's not a Bentley or a Rolls Royce, but it is kind of like an Audi or it's a premium product where you pay a little bit more, but there's a justification for that. But there are oftentimes demographic and sort of customer decisions that get made for you when you decide to play in that segment of the market.
Yeah. All right. Wow. Thanks for bearing with me. Handing it back over, Mom, Benji. Thanks.
I'm going to do my best. Jamie. Sorry about that. I had some serious.
No.
My house must need an upgrade on internet. I don't think I've
been on a panel since COVID started where there wasn't something like this, and so this one feels mild in certain ways.
Yes, I would agree with you. I'd agree. So I don't know if you got to this before with Isabel, but you did envision the brand, you did envision the value proposition. I think you are sort of wearing a dual hat as CMO. This is a brand and marketing organization. Would love to get your perspective on how you thought about the brand, how you went about building it, and then what sort of marketing strategy you have in place now and that you think's been successful, and how did you sort of evolve and modulate that over time?
So I never thought about myself that way, but I think it is true when you're growing business, certainly much farther into the growth trajectory of the business than I would have imagined. You're right. You don't have a CMO, and you don't have usually a chief product officer either. The CEO, the founder, is meant to define the value prop, the product, the brand, how they all fit together. And there are disadvantages, which is that I was a corporate lawyer and I worked at a hedge fund and then I worked in education. I am not a marketer at heart, nor do I there are real product people that have been, PMs for 15 years, and they have like a really clear sense of the product iteration process and stuff. On the other hand, I think what's really nice about being CEO of a growing business is you're able to integrate all of those pieces more, because you're not doing marketing qua marketing as something separate from the rest. you have this through line through, product, value prop, the way that the brand is positioned. And for me, probably the couple things that I've had to do is, when you're a younger business, you don't have a lot of data. You don't get to do focus groups. So you do have to go with your gut a bit more. I think you have to, talk to your customers. You have to stay close to what they want. But you really do have to say, I think this is where the hole is in the market. I think this is what people are going to respond to. And we just have to make a bet and cross our fingers and hope that we're not totally wrong about this. Because if we are, we could lose our shirts, and we have no way to get the data necessary to actually validate that's right before we put it out there. And for better or worse, that brand at Industrious, it's evolved over time, but for a very long time was focused around essentially being warm and welcoming and a place where everyone could work and everyone could feel productive in this very modern sense about, not doing the most work, but doing your best work. And we got lucky, and it really did resonate, I think, from the very early days, in part because we have this very big, very bad competitor that we were able to at least see where their messaging wasn't landing. And that little sort of piece of information, I think, did help.
That's great. That's great intel. So really, like a fast follower strategy seems to have done well for you. Sort of in the same realm of thinking about the marketing mix, there's obviously, because of the behemoth in the co-working space and some of the perception and reputational challenges, just wondering how you sort of address that. How do you educate the market around the benefits and the pros and the cons of co-working? And I know you've initiated a workplace operator council. I just thought it'd be really interesting to share that concept, which I thought was, super smart, to bring like-minded people together and all in service of the kind of greater good. But maybe you could talk a little bit about that, as really I consider that a marketing strategy in many respects.
Okay, so I would start by saying, I think it's fair to say that our industry, in certain ways, there are some perception issues. You kind of have to say, okay, for better or worse, you have this very large, very loud player in the sector, and they're going to define a lot of people's first view of what it is and isn't. And for us, what that's meant from a messaging point of view is, I think most industries like ours, when they really take off, it's when you go and say, it's not that we can do this faster than you can, or cheaper than you can, or more flexibly than you can. It's we can do this better than you can. And I think because that has very much not been the message in our industry, because you're not just having to go into the market and say we're great at what we do, but you're having to also overcome incoming sort of hypotheses on the part of your customers that this is a quick and dirty way to, if you need a couple desks in a city, I think we've had to over sort of index on, or lean more heavily than we otherwise would, on quality and on saying this is about getting a better workplace experience for your employees. And you can measure your employee engagement and you can measure your employee attrition rates. But I think in general, we've had to say, this is how you'll know when our product is succeeding, and to really stand behind that earlier in the life of the business and more comprehensively or persuasively than we would have had to if we didn't have competitors or things that were pulling market perception in more of a either trend or kind of like, cost-based direction. The workplace council you mentioned is, when COVID started, one downside of our industry is, mature industries, they have, it's very clear what are the metrics that matter. And, Marriott's going to speak on behalf of the hospitality industry, and CBRE is going to speak on behalf of the real estate services industry. And there's no one to speak on behalf of our industry. There's no coordination. There's no general perception of what's going on, what isn't. And so I think I really felt like, for all the bad things about the moment at hand, here was an opportunity to reach out to all of our competitors globally, the kind of 20, and say, let's join together. Let's put out a document that shows how to, run a workplace safely, but also use that as the entry point to say, what would it look like for all the operators in the industry to have a unified voice and figure out what it looks like to start coordinating on messaging. And to your point, there is a marketing component to that. And I think it turned out to be pretty effective. I'm glad we did it. And probably it was a year or two too late.
Interesting. So COVID was kind of your catalyst in this case, but the value of uniting together probably could have yielded some benefits earlier.
I think you have to have the confidence. You have to have the confidence to call up all your competitors and say, hey, are you up for this? And everyone's going to know Industrious put it together. So that's like, you might not like that, but I think there are going to be advantages. And it kind of like, I wish I had the confidence to do that a couple years ago, because I think people were excited about it. And I think we're a big enough business and have a strong enough reputation that we merited being able to play that role in our industry.
Yeah. And so kind of a related segue to that, and I applaud you for doing that, because I think it set the right tone that you want to see, particularly given the circumstances we were all navigating through. And, I didn't get to say this at the beginning, it's sort of obvious, but real estate, office space is one of those industries in the crosshairs of obviously the pandemic directly impacted. So we've both been thinking and spending an awful lot of time considering what the future of the office is, right? Hypotheses, we've all done our data and research and trying to anticipate, uncertainty and amongst the unknown. There's a lot of question marks, but I think there are some truths about people and humans that I think are going to take us through this in a positive way. Would love to hear from your perspective. And obviously CBRE, and we have a view on this, and we're starting to see it play out already. But how has Industrious really adapted the offering during the pandemic? And how do you see that sort of playing out in the maybe more the medium to long term as COVID hopefully, rescinds and is less of a factor?
So I will say, we've talked to 5,000 customers since COVID started. So I obviously, to that earlier point, you have to have a point of view, you have to have a gut about where things are going. But at this point, it is helpful to be in deep conversations with all your customers about them explicitly saying what they want and what they're trying to do. And I think the patterns are starting to become very, very, very clear. Almost every company you talk to, mid-size, large, small business, et cetera, but particularly mid-size and large, I think there is a shift towards saying we want to give employees the choice of where to work and when. People are not going to come to the office 5 days a week anymore, but they are going to come 2, 3, maybe 4 days a week, probably 2 or 3 days a week. And there's going to be less and less willingness on the part of employees to sit in the same chair 10 hours a day in a big open floor plan pit and have to do all the types of work they do, writing an investment memo, phone calls, quick emails, deep thought emails, all sitting in the same physical space with the same distractions, et cetera. And so I think the core themes are more employee empowerment and a more distributed way of working. And I mean that both in the broadest sense, that instead of 70% of headcount working at headquarters, you might have 40 or 30% of headcount working at headquarters, and more regional offices and more offices in Asheville, North Carolina, or Missoula. And also within a metro area, instead of having one downtown LA office. And if you happen to live in Orange County, tough having a distribution of offices within a metro area. And then for an individual employee, having a distributed workplace experience. So you're working from home sometimes, from the office sometimes. When you're in the office, you're at your desk when you're working on an Excel model, but you're moving to focus rooms when you have to work in deep focus. You're working in brainstorming rooms when you have to sort of brainstorm. And because people are not going to be at the office 5 days a week, and so you're going to see average office utilization go from 60% to 35%, that means instead of having to have this one-size-fits-all giant open floor plan workplace, you're going to be able to have more diversity of spaces and have employees move throughout all of those. As far as what that means for us, the biggest distinction is, for the very first time, we put out a subscription model we've been thinking about for years that we thought was a little too quirky and a little too progressive, because real estate's a very conservative industry. And what that was a utilization-based subscription for the office, just like, Zipcar or
Yep.
Amazon Web Service or anything else. You're going to say, I'm going to go to the office twice a week, and I'm going to sign up at the beginning of the week, which days I'm going to go in, and there's going to be a private office waiting for me those days. And if I end up going 3 or 4, I'm going to pay overages, essentially. That's a very different way to consume real estate, and it's growing for us right now at 20% week over week. So it's like by far the fastest growing subscription type for us. And so as quirky as it is, I think it is the right thing for the moment.
Mm-hmm. And for now, I'm wondering from a corporate perspective, how do business leaders feel about that over the long term? Having, you have a lot less, quote, control over your workforce and actually doing the calculus of figuring out like what is headquarters, what is not headquarters, and doing the math is not a small feat. And then I'll add a third point and just want your thoughts around this. And then third point, as you describe kind of the long tail future of work, the implications for residential real estate and even, population density and where people end up spending time, it's pretty profound if you were to map that out over, say, 5 years to a decade. And that gets out of the just our, immediate world, but it's kind of an interesting idea.
To the first point, this business is what it is. And I think a lot of growing businesses, particularly disruptive businesses, lose their way when they try to be something for everyone and they try to pretend that certain limitations on their business don't exist. So what we do is provide a productized workplace experience, but it means it's productized. It means you are taking something that was traditionally done in a very ground up, rip the building to the studs and build it from scratch because that's what Bank of America offices should look like, and you're turning into a product. And that has all of the advantages of anything that's productized. It has all the advantages of getting to consume something as a product and service, but it has the downside of the fact that it is productized. It does mean it's closer to Starbucks than when I hand brew my own cup of coffee with my own mix of beans that I made, and you have to be okay with that. And I think to your point, it does mean the company has less control over the branding, over the workplace experience. And for any product, I think the way you overcome that is you say, great, look at the numbers. If your employees, for the most part, if you try this out in 2 markets, and 80% of your employees say, I liked it more when I was in Bank of America controlled space. I liked it more when IBM created and around the offices. Well, then that's a sign that this is an inferior option and you should use it sparingly when you absolutely have to. But if 80% of your employees say, actually, we prefer this, then okay, yes, you did lose some control. But if your employees are preferring it, then what was that control? You now use, let's say, you used to build your own CMS or something, and now you use Salesforce. That means you lost control. But if your employees prefer using Salesforce in the internal Pfizer, CMS, then what are you solving by continuing to use the internal version? I think that's the argument.
Yep. No, it's an interesting. It'll be interesting to see as it evolves. But I think, as you said, companies are getting more comfortable. I think it also has tangential implications for talent evaluation and culture. And I'm sure culture is a big topic that you think about, and if I come to Industrious, I imagine I feel like I'm in an Industrious culture. Are you white labeling some of your products? I'm not sure we touched on that quite yet.
The way it would feel is for let's say a team of 50, there would be a suite with its own entrance and its own spaces, and it would look and feel like Ernst & Young offices. Again, it wouldn't be as customized as if Ernst & Young had built it from scratch, but it would be Ernst & Young space. It would be identifiable as that. The difference would be, if you think about the average 50-person office, what do you have? You have a bunch of desks, you have 2 conference rooms, and you have a phone room.
Yep.
This would be a 50-person office integrated into a 100,000 square foot complex of different things. So you might spend half your day within the Ernst & Young controlled space that does feel like Ernst & Young. But if you want to get away from your colleagues, if you want to you're able to exit that and enter, you know, a workplace resort, for lack of a better word, with 50 focus rooms and 70 different conference rooms and things like that. And so it does involve kind of moving back and forth between branded private space and more unbranded shared space. But if you think about it, that's always been true of a building. I mean, unless it's the corporate campus, most companies share the lobby of a building with other companies. They share the elevator. So there's always been some calibration of what can be private and what can be shared at a building level. There's just a recalibration going on.
Great. No, it's very interesting insights, for sure. And just on the topic of sort of insights in yourself and productivity, because that kind of connects into what we were just talking about in this new environment. I'd like to know personally, you have an interesting work style, I think. And my guess is that may have maybe that has influenced the products that you've developed, maybe it hasn't. But could you chat a little bit about your nighttime huddles and how you approach work and how you organize your own time? And maybe that's again says something about the freedom and choice that kind of this future that you're defining could provide other people.
I never thought about that through line before of kind of like, if you have quirky productivity needs, does that make you as the CEO of a sort of productivity expert? But it is true. Like, first off, I'm a night owl. So I always work, for certain types of writing, I really can't do it other than between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. And
wow.
I just got married, and I'm sure we're gonna have kids soon. And I think that's probably gonna throw all this into disarray. But I think, but that is true, and I think what that means is I think I've been and also I really can't get 40% of the type of work I have to do done in a traditional office setting. I can't write, I can't brainstorm when there's 100 other people in the room. And so I think that has given me a very clear window into the fact that different people work different ways. And what happens is a lot of people don't totally acknowledge that to themselves. They come home and some days they were on top of the world and they got twice as much done as they thought they were going to get done. And other days they checked all the boxes, they worked for 9 hours and nothing quite came together. Everything was subpar and it felt like one of those days. But what people aren't great at is saying, well, what was the distinction between those 2 days? What was happening environmentally? What was happening that for some reason that day I was on top of the world and that day I barely got anything done? And recognizing that and sort of using myself as a guinea pig, I think has been helpful in trying to say what we can offer customers is a bit of insight into that and a bit of help in saying, you, the individual, this is the type of work you do. Are you doing high cognitive work or low cognitive work, interactive work or independent work? And you can help people map out, what types of environments and what ways to structure their day will help make that work. But 99% of white collar workers have no one at their side helping them to do that. And that's one of the great advantages of kind of a business like us.
Yeah. So Jamie, your innovation, your interesting and new ways of thinking about work, I think are going to have implications both for those who participate with Industrious and even if you don't. So you are kind of the ultimate brand innovator as we're, having this discussion today. I believe, Isabel, we have a number of questions that we might want to turn to the Q&A now, if that makes sense. So I'm calling, I think that was, I don't know if you'd like me to have one more question for Jamie, if you want to turn it over to the question session. I'm going to take that as a yes. All right, let's see. I have a whole bunch of questions in my inbox. So Jamie, you ready? Working from home and distancing have altered consumer media and digital habits in many ways. What are you seeing when it comes to those types of behavioral changes and how are they adapting?
So, this is where, I have to be an amateur CMO, but if not, I think this might not answer that question head on, but I think the biggest thing we're noticing in terms of consumer media and digital habits is people knew how their life worked 9 months ago. And so it was easy to run an Instagram ad or a TV ad or something. And you kind of said, this is your life and this is, and we're this, we're this kind of car for this kind of person. And basically so often with marketing, people already have this kind of structure in their lives of like, oh, it's like the BMW of cannabis beverages. Oh, it's like the Herman Miller chair of, and I think as all that has gotten blown up a little bit and people feel a little bit unmoored, I think when people are consuming media, what we found is they need a lot more hand-holding. So instead of like, to make it concrete, instead of for us running an ad that says, you deserve your most productive workplace, you deserve your most productive day at work, Industrious. It's just too mushy. It's not, for the moment at hand, it's not concrete enough. You need to say to people, evidence shows that the average white collar worker feels more, less stressed and more productive if they go twice a week to a private office that they can shut the door and call their own. And it's longer and it's more boring and it's more mundane in a certain way, but that concreteness and hand-holdingness, I think, is kind of what consumers need right now. The broad thematic stuff that forces them to connect the dots. Yeah. People don't have the framework to connect those dots right now.
So that actually segues nicely to the next question. Many brands have reduced media budgets over the past few months. How have you leaned in or leaned out? And how has that mix maybe changed because of the environment we're managing through right now?
We're spending more than pre-COVID. In another version of the world, I wish we weren't, but we are spending more than pre-COVID. I do think, like, for better or worse, people underestimate what our industry looks like right now. Or I can't speak for our competitors, but our sales are growing 30% month over month right now. So this is not a business that's really kind of in the doldrums and just needs to pull back on spending. And I think you have to be smart and you have to really, again, make a more affirmative, proactive case. But we are spending more. I know that that's not indicative of the average company. So I wish I had an answer for how companies are pulling back. But for us, this is our moment and we don't want to let it go by.
Yep. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, even for us, and we're obviously a different angle, a different dimension of the real estate space. While it's not so much our spend, but our engagement, the way we're engaging digitally in particular, and sharing content and thought leadership is actually accelerated pretty significantly. I think to your answer a couple of moments ago around what people were used to doing, the framework of how they engage with businesses and companies has changed dramatically. So you kind of need to hopefully take advantage of that. Another really great question that just came through is, what effect do you think the Gen Z generation will have on corporations and brands and as a whole as they move into leadership roles in the next 20 to 30 years? And do you see yourself as a brand meeting, that audience, perhaps where it's going?
It's a great question. I think it's obviously something we wrestle with a lot and try to help our customers navigate, and particularly as relates to when someone shows up at work, what do they believe is their connection with their employer and everything like that. Less so how do they consume third-party brands. But I think probably the dominant thing that we see is, there's an old model of like, I'm an Alcoa man, or I'm a GM man or something. Like, your employer defines you. Right. And I think Gen Z is very good at saying, like, we're going to define our employer. And you saw that, this summer with protests around Black Lives Matter and people saying, like, I'm going to write letters to my senator, I'm going to protest, and also I'm going to lobby my employer to reflect the values or the perceptions, I have. And so rather than your personality, your desires, your sort of like way of navigating the world being subsumed to Johnson & Johnson corporate culture, I think there's an understanding that employees kind of get together, they assert what they want, and it's the employer's job or the brand's job to reflect that, which I think is an awesome development And companies have to get much, much better at listening and much more bottoms up and much less coercive if they want to navigate it well. But there's going to be great rewards for companies that do a good job of it.
Yeah, and create cultures that kind of enable that in some way. It is a really interesting shift. Couple more questions. Okay, this is a great one. 5 generations in the workplace all learn differently. Can you comment on the responsibility companies will have to teach in the new era of work? I don't know if, I don't know if you can answer the teach, but you certainly, as you have 5 generations in an industrious space, what are you seeing in terms of sort of engagement with certain aspects or interest or comfort in your space, or not, or has the generational sort of divide sort of flattened to a degree? I'd like to think so.
I think both are true. I think there's, in certain ways, generational flattening. And in the other hand, what COVID has sort of illuminated is everybody's different. Some people have 4 kids they're taking care of at home. Some people have elderly parents they're taking care of. Some people are stuck in a studio apartment and bored out of their minds and they want to work 18 hours a day. And then there's everything in between. And so I think that's going to hopefully be one of the great outcomes of the moment at hand, is recognizing even within generations, there's just a lot of diversity in the way people work, in what they need out of their workplace. And again, that sort of empowerment focused or bottoms up focused workplace structures that give employees the tools to decide what they want to do are going to be the ones that win out. And I think that is also true of corporate training. Like, there's just no question, you don't get to leave college at 22 and now your learning is done and the next 50 years is spent working. You have to keep learning to keep up. And I think companies are right now figuring out what it looks like to be a partner for their employees in doing that in a way that's more individualized, because the way that corporate training works at Johnson & Johnson is you watch these 3 videos. It's very clear that doesn't work with 5 different generations in a workplace, let alone with 100,000 very different people with different methods of learning in a workplace.
Yeah. So Jamie, I had a big, I want to do one last question. Isabel, if that's okay? Mm-hmm. I had a question for you, which is, what is the big innovation that's going to come out of the COVID period? But I just love what you just said, which actually has nothing to do with COVID or the pandemic, which is more around that big theme of how companies will support and continue to educate and nurture their talent in the future. So maybe that's not a question, that's more of a statement. And I think an interesting one to almost conclude our, the discussion on I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but that feels like a pretty big statement and a really interesting one that has a lot of positivity around it, if you want to comment.
I think that is particularly what Gen Z, but I think that's what everyone wants right now. Like the kind of, we're going to coddle you and serve you monkfish dinner in the cafeteria, that's nice. But that McKinsey, there are companies that historically did this well and it fell out of favor. You're going to work at Goldman Sachs for 4 years and it's going to transform your career. That particular way of thinking about what role a company could play in their employee's life, I think that's about to skyrocket. And the companies that do that well, people are going to gravitate to those companies.
Yep. Really positive note. Really exciting times for you, certainly, for us at CBRE, as we think about the whole real estate ecosystem and all the innovation and adaptability that's taking place. So I know I gleaned an awful lot of insights just from these 45 minutes. I'm sure everyone listening in, and hopefully those who have an opportunity to listen to a replay will as well. So I want to personally thank you, Jamie, for being such a great speaker and getting to know you a little bit more, which has been awesome. Hopefully we get to see each other face to face one of these days.
I would love that.
And Izzy, you're welcome.
Yeah, Izzy. I'll close out. Jamie, you're always welcome in Westchester anytime.
Okay, deal.
Thank you. I'm inviting. Well, thank you both. Thank you, Jamie, so much for joining us and sharing your experience with our audience. Even though you're not formally a CMO, you have, of course, well, I think everything's marketing. So, starting a company and branding and learning about kind of how you founded Industrious in the first place, I think is really really relevant for the brand marketers tuning in. So thank you.
Fair enough. Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
This was
Benji,
great.
for coming back.
Thanks.
We'll see you both soon.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Well, thanks everyone for tuning into that session. We have one last session today. Really, really excited.